Okay, so in my kind of walk-in ramble for today, I wanted to talk specifically about exactly how I would look at Venice versus Sarasota, Florida.
And for those that don't know me real quick, I'm Adam Hancock. I have a real estate group here in Southwest Florida, and I post daily video content on Florida relocation and investment guidance. Please like and subscribe for access to over 100 videos in the last 12 months and counting.
So this has been really of a hot question as of late, and it's more interesting to me probably at this time than it's ever been about why people are trying to figure out these two areas versus each other. In the past, I would say they were much more divided as far as like how I viewed them. You know, the cost was different, locations obviously very different. So it was easier decision, but now there's a lot more that's apples for apples. And then there's emerging stuff about areas that weren't as developed that makes it more comparable. So I wanted to kind of hash that out because I know it's becoming more interesting. And I think there's a old school way people view Venice. And I think that's evolving. I know that I look at it different. So I think there's a couple different things as far as vibe, location, opportunity that differ. And I think it's really a real-time conversation because it's evolved so quickly. So I want to kind of hash out that a little bit. Hope that adds you some value. So let's hop in. Okay, so let's talk location first. The reason being that I think this might be the biggest thing to solve, and I think a lot becomes like a deeper criteria that's all basically location and then secondary data in addition to that would be more comparable to each other. So location matters the most because in my mind, you have kind of Sarasota and Manatee County, and I think you kind of view Venice as separate than those two, not even of those of each other, because it's access to the stuff that you're gonna want access to. So if you're living in Lakewood Ranch or Palmer Ranch, you're gonna go to the same beaches for the most part. And you're gonna go to the same downtown, and that's what the access is. So those you kind of look at versus each other, and then you get more minute there. I think Venice then just throws you in a whole different location where it changes a few things. One, so like if you live in South Venice, right, you're 45 minutes from downtown Sarasota. Realistically, and which is gonna then be 45 minutes from most of the beaches. So which is realistically, as much as you think 25 miles doesn't sound far, you're probably mostly gonna live that Venice lifestyle. You're gonna go to Venice Beach, you're gonna go to downtown Venice, you're gonna go to Casperson. You might even go south. So I think location matters as far as one, regardless if you love everything else, you really have to get your head around that that's kind of your choice. So like you're gonna go one or the other, and you wanna really do that for the right reasons. And even a part of that might be, you might want to be further south because you have family in Bonita Springs and Fort Myers. So the best version of Sarasota County to you, if you didn't want to be maybe a little bit more in no man's land, is, there's a snake right in front of me. A little bit more in no man's land is, it might be, Venice might be a more in-town version of an Englewood or something like that. Not a snake fan. So that's something to think about. And then like, you know, if you go to Venice, you know, do you want access to the airport? It's going to put you further than Lakewood Ranch. So, and then the schools differ a little bit or whatever. So, but I still think, I think you pick location, and then you can usually replicate the housing in either one of those parts of town. So the good thing about that is you're going to pick based on what you like better. And I mean, what I found is it's pretty visceral, right? Like the Venice people are romantic about Venice. Some people don't care either way. Venice is a little bit more coastal of a town. It's a little bit more laid back of a town. Generally about how people view it. So I think once you decide on that, then you can say, okay, school districts versus blah, blah, blah. Or you can say the housing costs versus this or whatever. But I think it's comparable enough as far as the schools, the cost, and the proximity to stuff that I think you can look at them as a location versus location first and then push everything down from there. So I want to kind of get that as the top header. And then let's talk a little bit more about all the rest. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of group vibe, age, that kind of thing in one category. So the most interesting thing lately is that just how people view Venice, right? There's so much personal opinion that goes into this thought. And then there's an evolution of like, if you grew up here like me, like where I saw Venice 20 years ago, right? So like people have such like, you know, kind of like poignant opinions about an area. I think most of the time, I think they're super, super biased. And what I'm seeing though is that I think it's a positioning thing, right? So I'm not romantic about any of the places. And I just like I like where certain stuff sits on a map better because I just want access to everything. But I think it is it's a evolution of the people that I talk to every day, of what people are trying to do, what they're trying to figure out in their minds. I think there's a lot of like really deep indicators that tell you where it might end up. Now, so let's talk about age first. So I would be astonished if most people you talk to don't say Venice is super old, way older than Sarasota. You know, it's only old people, it's only retirement, there's nothing to do. So what's interesting about that is that Venice has Venice Senior High, Laurel Nokomis, Venice Middle, Pineview for the gifted. All of those schools sit in a very specific corridor, and all of those kids live in that district, right? So that's one thing. I mean, no one's doing like these, beyond Pineview possibly, but no one's doing school choice from like Bradenton to go down to Venice for the most part, maybe barring like sports and that kind of thing. So, I mean, there's not like there's no kids there, right? Now, I mean, granted, like you had the evolution of Welland Park, that master planned. It was the West Villages. They added communities, rebranded it as Welland. That kind of sits in South Venice, Northport District, Hugs, Englewood, kind of right there. But I mean, I look at the way I think what tells you a lot is I look at the way these builders position the communities. So think about price point, amenities, and where they sit. You know, they're putting these $370,000, $350,000 for 2 single family homes. They're putting splash parks in the neighborhoods. They're right next to really highly rated elementary schools. What that's going to do is it's going to bring kids there, right? And again, like all those kids live in that district. So I get kind of the history of why people view Venice like it is. It feels a little bit more laid back. It's definitely a vacation zone. And I mean, the average census, don't get me wrong, is definitely a little older than Sarasota. But by no means do I think it's where it was about how a lot of people talk to me about it. I think it's more like, again, I think locationally is really what you have to think about. And, you know, Lakewood Ranch is bigger, and all these areas are maybe easier version to get your head around. So in my personal opinion, I think it's an easy route to say all the things that everybody says about Venice. I don't know if it's necessarily true. And I very strongly feel like it's gonna evolve because traditionally, I mean, affordability and that kind of thing is with opportunity, and not everybody can afford, you know, with a family can afford a $600,000 house. Traditionally that goes on the fringes, and it goes south and it goes east, and where Lakewood Ranch is going, right? So Venice does the same thing, and a lot of it's south. And then arguably, I mean, if you want access to southern stuff, going south's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, I wouldn't say it's super close to Fort Myers. It's 60 miles, but again, I mean, it might be an interesting option for folks that appeals to. And you know, I just want to kind of get that out there, is that I think that's evolving, and that's my feeling. I mean, there's so many people trying to figure that scenario out to me, and Lakewood Ranch is becoming a little trickier than it used to be, which is making it less attractive. Palmer Ranch is a little hard to get your head around as far as it's pieced together. So then a Welland Park comes out, rebrands, has all these holistic amenities, is affordable, and that's going to bring families to it, and then that's going to get deeper into Venice. That's going to evolve, and then I think we could have like a mini Lakewood Ranch scenario eventually. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. I think it's evolving, and I just wanted to kind of, I mean, it's not a stigma, but I wanted to kind of like overlap that. I don't think that's, you know, some of these real strong visceral opinions. I don't know if it's necessarily, it's with shades of gray. I don't know if it's deep truth, but so I differ a little bit there. Okay, and then the school specifically. So what you have with a lot of the districts over there, if you get south enough, so where Venice sits is like south Sarasota, a lot of Palmer Ranch. And then it kind of creeps into Nokomis and Osprey, like east of Casey Key. And then you cross into Venice city limits. And when you cross into there, like you have kind of Laurel Nokomis on the border. You have Venice Middle. You have Venice Senior High School, which is right in downtown Venice. And then you have Pineview. What you generally have is, you know, really highly rated schools. I think everybody views them like that. The sports at Venice High are great. Pineview is like really touted in the United States. And so when you're looking at kind of like good elementary through high school, a lot of that's going to sit, I mean, the good thing is, right, like Riverview High is great in South Sarasota. Sarasota High is, I think, mid-rated, but like the schools in South Sarasota generally pretty good. And then a lot of Lakewood Ranch is pretty good, especially on the eastern end. So that's why I was saying, like, once you pick location, right, it's not that difficult to replicate beyond like specific neighborhoods that fringe into different territories. It's not that difficult to be like, if I have to go to Venice to get schools, or I have to go to Lakewood Ranch to get good schools. So again, I think it gets simpler once you make that leap. And I think seeing both in person really, like, they're so different. It helps people decide. So I think the schools are important there. And then again, I think just an overall, I'm going to talk about housing, but I think the overall arching of just not leaving the vibe conversation for a minute. I think the overall arching kind of vibe of Venice to me is the reason that it kind of feels like it does is I think that, I mean, I've said it a million times, the barrier island thing and where these communities are positioned in Venice city limits is really important to like how people treat it and the vibe and how eclectic it is. And, you know, just the fact that like Casey Key ends into Venice Beach merges with the mainland. Welland Park, that master plan community of West Villages or whatever, it's only 9 miles from the coast, where most of Lakewood Ranch is going to be much further. Even Palmer Ranch is still going to put you a little further in most communities. So because of that, it's just got this, it's like a different kind of energy, you know. I think it's laid back in a cool beach way, and not for everybody, right? But and their downtown is super different than downtown Sarasota. Downtown Sarasota is more like, I mean, downtown Venice is artsy too, but downtown Sarasota's got this like upscale feeling thing. And downtown Venice, I think, is more like beachy, eclectic. So I think it's a cool thing. But again, like these are not close to each other. So sitting in the middle in Palmer would give you a happy medium, trickier housing. But that's kind of why I think what pushes down the vibe of Venice is that kind of feeling. And I think the beach, mainland proximity and all that really plays into that. Okay, I want to talk about housing too. So it'd be a real fool's errand to leave that out of this kind of conversation. So housing is another one of those really interesting things to me lately. So, you know, if you would have asked me like, I mean, still like even a few weeks ago, you know, my feeling was generally way out east in Lakewood Ranch, and South Venice is really an opportunity to kind of save a little bit of money. And that's one of the things that might pull you in that direction to look at it, because it's next to the schools, a little cheaper. And that is definitely true in specific builders. But I mean, I've like dead compared like Neal versus Neal in other communities. And I think it's as in closer than it's ever been as far as the gap on pricing between Sarasota and Venice, which makes the decision point way more towards location. And you don't have to make a harsh decision based on your criteria if you have both access to both. So that's kind of my general synopsis of that. I mean, it's always a place to maybe get slightly cheaper condo near the water than Sarasota, because like the Sarasota condos near the water in this like cream of the crop area. So it's still somewhat of a version of that. Venice Island is the downtown area by the beach is getting more and more expensive, you know, so it's not as cheap, but I would say the beach property is probably in a slightly cheaper, now this is with a lot of caveats, right? But in a slightly cheaper general kind of demographic, but it's very different too. But the single family, new construction kind of housing, I don't think it's all that different at the current moment. So, you know, you could say a lot more there, but that's my general kind of theme there. And again, I think all of this kind of is that same push down from location, that the less you have that's different and variable, the more you can make the decision based on the real meat of what's important. And in some ways, I mean, it was nice, you used to be able to save money, but people might have chose that because of money, and then they might have been in a location they didn't love, and that kind of works itself out years later. And now it's much more like, pick what style you like better, you want to get the vibe. It's easier because they're so different. And then the housing part, I think, is somewhat simplistic on kind of a price standpoint, but not as much on a logistics standpoint, but that's even everywhere. So you pick area, figure out house later. All right, so I wanted to get out again, and this is one of those, I'm trying to bottle these conversations I have with a lot of folks in ways that they'll add value, because I know it's hot on a lot of people's mind. It's not me randomly using SEO to pick topics and that kind of thing. So I just want to kind of give you what's been on my mind and heart related to some of these issues. I would just say generally, I mean, these areas are really interesting in their own outright, and they're real stylistic. So I would say the best thing that people can do, especially relocating or investing in that kind of thing, the perfect thing to do is, once you get your head around it a little bit, is to, if you can view them on the same trip versus each other over separate days, and then like look at the housing in the morning, and then do some, what's the best version of Venice as far as amenities in the afternoon, and kind of live that lifestyle for a day. Usually people like it points you really hard back in the other way, or you just like fall in love with the second option when you get there. So I would just say generally, there's a lot of really harsh opinions when it comes to it. People like get mad at me for talking about how Venice isn't super old. But I mean, I think some of that stuff's short-sighted, just in my opinion. So I would just say keep an open mind. I mean, I think there's a right version based on, you know, I'm usually talking to people, I can tell where they lean. And then if your criteria says like, you know, it's an Englewood conversation, you know, it's like 350 with a pool, new construction, might not work, right? Or you go east, but all you're doing is your criteria is moving you a bit from what you're trying to achieve. So one of those two locations is the mecca for that version. And then you move slightly, possibly if you need to, for criteria to get the best of everything and maybe drive 10 minutes further. All right, so that's kind of that, Sarasota versus Venice. I hope that helps. I've been trying to get out a little bit more and like relay things immediately when I hear them, stay a little bit more in real time. Things that I kind of are fresh in my mind, I'm trying to get that to more people quicker. So I hope you like these style. If there's any certain topics you're more interested in, please drop a comment or email me or whatever. I'd love to kind of answer any questions you have, and see you guys in the next one.